Waitress feeds a billionaire who pretends to be a beggar in front of his mansion. Her kindness shocked everyone. Before we dive into this incredible story, we wish you a prosperous new year. May line fall in place for you and your endeavors throughout 2026. Please let us know where you're watching from in the comment box. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Hit the like and subscription button. I have a special story for you tomorrow. Sarah Mitchell's alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., the same time it had for the past 3 years. She slapped the clock silent and sat up, her body protesting every movement. Her lower back throbbed. Her feet ached before they even touched the floor. 22 hours this week she'd already worked, and it was only Wednesday. She walked past the small bedroom where her daughter Lily slept, 7 years old, curled up under a thin blanket that had seen better days. Sarah paused in the doorway, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall. Lily's inhaler sat on the nightstand, next to the medical bills Sarah couldn't afford to open anymore. $8,000 in debt. That's what keeping your child alive cost when you had no insurance and worked 3 part-time jobs that offered nothing but minimum wage and empty promises. Sarah didn't cry anymore. Tears were a luxury for people who had time to feel sorry for themselves. She had exactly 45 minutes to get ready, catch 2 buses, and make it to the Rosewood Diner before the breakfast rush started. There was no time for tears. She poured instant coffee into a chipped mug and drank it black, standing over the sink. The apartment was cold. The heater had broken 2 weeks ago, and the landlord kept promising to fix it. Sarah had stopped believing his promises around the same time she stopped believing that hard work was enough to survive. "Just get through today," she whispered to her reflection in the dark window. Just today. That was all she ever told herself. One day at a time, because thinking about tomorrow, about next week, about next year, that was a fast track to giving up entirely. The morning shift at Rosewood Diner was chaos as always. Sarah tied her apron with practiced efficiency, grabbed her order pad, and plastered on the smile that didn't reach her eyes. The smile that said, "I'm happy to serve you," even when her feet were screaming and her stomach was eating itself from the inside. She hadn't had a real meal in 3 days. A few crackers here, some leftover toast there, whatever Lily didn't finish. Every dollar went to rent, utilities, and those damn medical bills that kept multiplying like rabbits. "Sarah, table 7 needs refills," Marcus, the other server, called out as he rushed past with a tray of pancakes. Sarah nodded and moved through the crowded restaurant, coffee pot in hand, her movements automatic. Smile, pour, smile, pour. Don't make eye contact for too long. Don't let them see how exhausted you are. Don't let them see that you're one missed paycheck away from losing everything. By noon, the lunch rush was in full swing. Sarah's vision was starting to blur at the edges, black spots dancing whenever she stood up too fast. She recognized the signs. Low blood sugar, dehydration, exhaustion. The unholy trinity of poverty. "You okay?" Linda, the head cook, caught her arm as Sarah stumbled slightly near the kitchen. "I'm fine," Sarah lied, steadying herself against the counter. Linda studied her with knowing eyes. Linda had been there, done that, wore the t-shirt until it fell apart. "When's the last time you ate?" Sarah didn't answer. Linda disappeared into the kitchen and returned a minute later with a styrofoam container. "Leftover meatloaf and mashed potatoes from yesterday. I was going to throw it out anyway." Sarah's eyes burned. Pride told her to refuse, but her body was screaming a different message. Her hands shook as she took the container. "Thank you," she whispered. "Linda, don't." Linda squeezed her shoulder. "Just eat it. You're no good to anyone if you collapse." Sarah clutched the container like it was made of gold. One real meal, actual protein, actual sustenance. She would eat half tonight, save half for tomorrow. Make it stretch as far as possible. Her shift ended at 2 p.m. Sarah changed out of her uniform in the cramped bathroom, splashed cold water on her face, and stared at her reflection. 32 years old, but she looked 40. Dark circles under her eyes, cheekbones too prominent, skin that had lost its glow years ago. "You're still standing," she told herself. "That's something." She walked through the Oakmont district, cutting through the old neighborhood with its massive estates and manicured lawns. It was the fastest route to the bus stop, even though walking past all that wealth made her feel like a ghost. Invisible. Irrelevant. The houses here probably cost more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. That's when she saw him. In front of the largest mansion on Pemberton Avenue, a man lay crumpled against the ornate iron gate. Not sitting. Not leaning. Lying. His body was twisted at an angle that looked wrong, painful. One arm stretched toward the sidewalk like he'd been reaching for something before he collapsed. Sarah's steps slowed. The man was old, maybe 70, maybe older. His clothes were in tatters, a jacket so thin she could see his ribs through the holes. His pants were held up with a piece of rope. No shoes, just feet wrapped in dirty rags. His face was pressed against the concrete, eyes half open, staring at nothing. Beside him, a piece of cardboard had fallen over. Sarah could see words bleeding through from the other side. Please help. Haven't eaten in 4 days. 4 days. Sarah's chest constricted. She looked around. It was the middle of the afternoon in a wealthy neighborhood. Where was everyone? As if summoning them with her thoughts, a woman in expensive athleisure wear jogged past, her designer headphones blocking out the world. She glanced at the collapsed man and her nose wrinkled in disgust. She ran faster, giving him a wide berth. A minute later, a black BMW pulled up to the mansion's gate. A man in his 40s, expensive suit, Rolex catching the sunlight, stepped out to punch in the security code. He looked directly at the homeless man at his feet. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Someone call the city. This is getting ridiculous. He didn't call anyone. He got back in his BMW and drove through the gate, which closed behind him with an electronic hum. Sarah watched, frozen in disbelief. Then came the worst one. A teenage girl, maybe 16, walked past while filming a TikTok. She was mid-sentence, talking about her new designer bag, when she nearly tripped over the man's outstretched arm. Oh my God, EW. She jumped back, still recording. There's literally a homeless guy passed out here. This is so gross. She angled the camera to show him in the frame. This is what happens when you don't work hard, guys. Like, get a job? Anyway, as I was saying about my new bag. She walked away, still talking to her phone, leaving the dying man behind like he was roadkill. Something inside Sarah snapped. She dropped to her knees beside him, the concrete biting into her skin through her worn jeans. She touched his face. His skin was cold, gray, waxy. Hey, she said urgently, gently turning his head. Hey, can you hear me? His eyes moved slightly, trying to focus on her face. His lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Please, he finally managed, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. Please, so hungry, can't? His eyes rolled back. No, 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 Sarah said, patting his cheek. Stay with me. Look at me. She looked at her bag. The styrofoam container inside. Her meal. Her only meal. The food she'd been fantasizing about all morning, the food that was supposed to keep her going through her second shift tonight at the grocery store. Her stomach cramped violently as if it knew what she was thinking. Her body begged her not to do this. She needed this food. She needed the energy. She had another 6 hours of work ahead of her, standing, lifting, moving. Without food she might collapse. Without food she might not make it. But this man was dying right here, right now, in front of a mansion that probably had a kitchen bigger than her entire apartment. Sarah opened her bag with trembling hands. The smell of meatloaf and gravy hit her like a physical force. Her mouth watered so intensely it hurt. Her stomach twisted itself into knots, screaming at her to eat, eat, eat. She opened the container and broke off a piece of meatloaf. Here, she whispered, lifting his head carefully and cradling it in her lap. Small bites. Can you swallow? She pressed the food to his cracked lips. At first he couldn't even close his mouth around it. She had to hold it there, waiting until his body remembered what to do. That's it, she said softly. Good. One more. Bite by bite she fed him. The meatloaf she'd been dreaming about. The mashed potatoes that were supposed to fill the empty cavern of her stomach. She watched every piece disappear into his mouth, and with each bite, her own hunger grew sharper, more painful, more impossible to ignore. But she didn't stop. When the container was half empty, color started returning to his face. His breathing steadied. His eyes focused. Why? His voice was stronger now, more human. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. Sarah looked at the container in her hands. Half left. She could stop now. She could keep the rest. He was already better. He would survive. She thought about Lily waiting for her at the neighbor's apartment. She thought about her second shift tonight, 6 hours of stocking shelves on an empty stomach. She thought about the bus ride home afterward, the dizziness, the shaking, the way the world would tilt sideways if she moved too fast. If she kept this food, she would make it through tonight. She gave it away. Sarah looked at the old man's face. At the tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. At the disbelief in his eyes that someone had actually stopped. She gave him the rest. Every last bite. Because you need it more than I do, she said quietly. The man ate like someone who had forgotten what food tasted like. When the container was empty, he clutched it to his chest and wept. Not quiet tears. Deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere ancient and broken. Sarah reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. It was all the cash she had until Friday. Her emergency fund. The money she kept hidden for when things went from bad to worse. She pressed it into his shaking hand. "For tomorrow," she said. "So you can eat again." "I can't," he tried to push it back. I can see it in your face. You're struggling too. You need this." "I have a job," Sarah said. "I have a roof over my head. I have a daughter waiting for me." She closed his fingers around the money. "You have nothing. So please take it." The old man stared at her. Really looked at her. His eyes, clearer now, studied her face like he was trying to memorize every detail. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah." "Sarah." He nodded slowly. Something shifted in his expression, something she couldn't quite read. "I'm Thomas. Thomas Pemberton." The name meant nothing to her. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his voice breaking. "As long as I live, I will never forget what you did today." "Never." Sarah gave him a tired smile. "Just promise me you'll find somewhere safe tonight, okay? Somewhere warm." "I promise." Sarah should have left. She had exactly 23 minutes to catch the bus to her second job. But something in Thomas's eyes made her pause. She sat down on the concrete beside him, her back against the cold iron gate. The mansion loomed behind them, all glass and stone and wealth beyond imagining. "How long have you been out here?" she asked. "4 days," Thomas said. "Right here in this spot? In front of this house specifically?" Thomas nodded, his gaze fixed on the mansion. I needed to see something." "See what?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I needed to see if anyone would stop. If anyone still cared about strangers. If kindness still existed, or if we've all become too comfortable to see suffering when it's right in front of us." Sarah understood that better than he knew. "And what did you learn?" "That most people are very good at not seeing." Thomas's voice was heavy. 100 people walked past me in 4 days. Maybe more. They saw me. But they didn't see me. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Sarah said quietly. "I'm invisible too. Different reasons, same result." Thomas turned to look at her. "Tell me." And somehow, sitting there on the cold sidewalk, Sarah found herself talking. About Lily's asthma, about the medical bills, about working 70-hour weeks and still falling further behind. About the apartment with the broken heater and the landlord who didn't care. About being 32 years old and feeling like life had already beaten her into the ground. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. "I don't know why I'm telling you all this." "Because someone's listening," Thomas said simply. "That's rarer than you think." They sat in silence for a while. Then Thomas said, "Sarah, I need to tell you something. Something important." She looked at him. He reached into his tattered jacket and pulled out a wallet. Black leather, expensive, completely incongruous with his appearance. Sarah's heart started racing. Thomas opened it and showed her a driver's license. The photo showed a distinguished older man in a suit. The name read, Thomas James Pemberton III. Below it, CEO Pemberton Industries. Sarah's mouth went dry. She looked at the ID, then at Thomas, then at the mansion behind them. "I don't understand," she whispered. Thomas gestured at the mansion. "This is my house, Sarah. I'm not homeless. I never was." The world tilted sideways. "Then why?" "Because I needed to know," Thomas said, his voice heavy with something like grief. "I needed to know if there was anyone left in this city, in this world, who would help a stranger without expecting anything in return. Who would choose kindness when it cost them everything." Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. "You were testing people." "I was looking for proof," Thomas corrected gently. "Proof that humanity isn't dead. That we haven't all become so obsessed with ourselves that we've forgotten what it means to be human." He gestured at the street. "Do you know how many people walked past me?" "Hundreds." "Do you know how many stopped?" "One." "You." Sarah stood abruptly, her legs shaking. "This is insane." "I know how it sounds. You're a billionaire who dressed up like a homeless person to test people's morality?" Her voice rose. "That's not just insane, it's cruel. Do you have any idea what it's like to actually be desperate? To actually be starving?" "No," Thomas said quietly. "I don't. And that's exactly the problem." Sarah's hands were trembling. "I need to go. I have to get to work." "Please," Thomas stood up, moving with a steadiness that betrayed his act. "Please just let me." "Let you what?" "Pay me for passing your test." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "I don't want your money. That's not what I'm offering." "Then what?" Thomas looked at her with something like desperation. Your daughter is sick. You're drowning in medical bills. You just gave me your last meal and your last $20. Let me help you. Please. I don't need charity. This isn't charity. Thomas's voice was firm. This is reciprocity. You helped me when I had nothing. Let me help you now. You never had nothing, Sarah said. That's the difference. She turned and walked away, her vision blurred with tears. Behind her, Thomas called out, Sarah, please? She didn't look back. But that night, as Sarah lay in bed, her stomach cramping from hunger, her body exhausted from 6 hours of stocking shelves on no food, she stared at the ceiling and wondered if she'd made a mistake. Not about helping him. She'd never regret that. But about walking away from help when she so desperately needed it. 3 days passed. Sarah worked her shifts, fed her daughter, and tried not to think about Thomas Pemberton or his massive mansion or the fact that she'd given away her last $20 to a billionaire in disguise. She tried not to think about how stupid she felt. On Saturday morning, there was a knock at her apartment door. Sarah opened it to find a man in a suit holding a manila envelope. Sarah Mitchell? Yes. I'm David Kramer, Mr. Pemberton's attorney. He asked me to deliver this to you personally. He handed her the envelope and left before she could respond. Inside was a letter, handwritten on expensive stationery. Dear Sarah, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. What I did was manipulative and I apologize for deceiving you. But I need you to understand something. I'm 70 years old. I've built an empire worth $3 billion. I've met presidents and celebrities. I've been to every corner of the world. And in all that time, I've never met anyone like you. You gave me your last meal. Your last dollar. You didn't know who I was. You didn't expect anything in return. You just helped because it was the right thing to do. That kind of goodness is rarer than any diamond, more valuable than any fortune. I don't want to insult you with money. But I'm asking you, begging you to let me help your daughter. The medical bills, the treatments she needs, everything. Not as payment, not as charity, but because a child shouldn't suffer because the world is broken. You don't owe me anything. You never will. But please, for Lily's sake, accept this help. The account information is below. It's yours. No strings attached. With deepest respect and gratitude, Thomas. Sarah stared at the letter, then at the bank account information. She logged into the account on her phone with trembling hands. The balance read, $250,000. Sarah's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, the letter clutched in her shaking hands, and for the first time in years she let herself cry. Not from sadness. Not from pain. From hope. The next morning, Sarah took Lily to the hospital. The same hospital where they'd been turned away 3 times because Sarah couldn't afford the specialist her daughter needed. She walked up to the billing desk with her head high. My daughter needs to see Dr. Robertson, the pulmonary specialist. The receptionist barely looked up. Dr. Robertson requires a $5,000 deposit for new patients. Check the account. Sarah slid a paper across the counter. Everything is covered. The receptionist's eyes widened. She typed rapidly, then looked up with a completely different expression. Mrs. Mitchell, I'll have someone bring you back immediately. Funny how money changed everything. Even the tone of voice. 2 hours later, Dr. Robertson sat across from Sarah and Lily in his office. The good news is we caught this early enough. With the right treatment, Lily should make a full recovery. Sarah felt like she could breathe for the first time in 3 years. What do you need from me? Nothing except bringing her to appointments. Everything else is taken care of. Sarah looked at her daughter, at her bright eyes and hopeful smile, and something inside her chest cracked open. That evening, Sarah called the number Thomas had included in his letter. He answered on the first ring. Sarah. Why? Her voice cracked. Why are you doing this? Because I can, Thomas said simply. And because you deserve it. Nobody deserves this much. You gave me everything you had, Thomas said. Your last meal. Your last dollar. You literally gave a stranger everything. How is this any different? Because you didn't need it, Sarah said. I did. Exactly. Thomas's voice was gentle. I didn't need your help, but you gave it anyway. That's what makes it extraordinary. That's what makes you extraordinary. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Can I ask you something? Anything. In those 4 days on the street, how many people do you think saw you? I counted. 347. And how many stopped? 1. Sarah closed her eyes. That's a depressing statistic. Or, Thomas said, it makes the one person who stopped infinitely more valuable. 3 weeks later, Thomas invited Sarah and Lily to dinner. Not at a restaurant, at his home. The mansion Sarah had walked past 100 times, never imagining she'd be inside. A housekeeper led them through rooms that looked like museum exhibits. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that probably cost more than Sarah's entire life earnings. Lily held Sarah's hand tightly, her eyes wide. "Mama, is this real?" "I think so, baby." They found Thomas in the kitchen. Not the formal dining room. Not some grand hall. The kitchen. He was wearing an apron, standing over a stove, stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce. "Sarah." "Lily." He turned with a genuine smile. "Perfect timing. Hope you like Italian." Sarah blinked. "You're cooking?" "Don't sound so surprised. I may be rich, but I can boil water." He winked at Lily. "Can you help me set the table?" Lily looked at Sarah, who nodded. The little girl walked over to Thomas and he handed her a stack of plates. They ate at a small table in the kitchen, not the massive dining room visible through the doorway. Just the three of them eating spaghetti and talking about nothing important. Lily told Thomas about school, about her favorite books, about the inhaler that didn't make her feel sick anymore. Thomas listened like every word was precious. After dinner, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch in the next room, Sarah and Thomas sat on the back patio overlooking a garden lit by soft lights. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said. "Always. That day on the street. Were you really that hungry? That desperate?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. "No. I was acting. But," he paused. "The hunger I felt watching people walk past without seeing me, that was real. The loneliness of being invisible, that was real. For 4 days, I experienced what it feels like to be nothing in other people's eyes." He turned to look at her. "You have no idea what it's like to have everything and feel like you have nothing that matters. And you have no idea what it's like to have nothing and feel like you have everything to lose," Sarah countered. Thomas smiled. "I think that's why we understand each other." Sarah looked out at the garden. "I can't repay you. Not ever. You know that, right?" "I don't want repayment." "Then what do you want?" Thomas hesitated. When he spoke, his voice was careful, vulnerable. "I want to be part of your life. Yours and Lily's. Not as a benefactor, not as someone you owe. Just as family. If you'll have me." Sarah's throat tightened. "Why?" "Because I'm 70 years old and I just learned that I've spent my entire life building wealth while completely missing the point." He gestured at the mansion behind them. "This house is empty. My life is empty. But that day on the street, when you knelt down beside me, when you gave me everything you had, I felt more alive than I have in decades." He looked at her with eyes that were suddenly wet. "I don't have children. I don't have grandchildren. My wife died 5 years ago, and since then I've been going through the motions of living without actually being alive. And then I met you and Lily, and suddenly everything made sense." Sarah felt tears sliding down her own cheeks. "I'm not trying to replace Lily's father," Thomas continued. "I'm not trying to fix you or save you. I'm just asking if maybe, possibly, you might consider letting a lonely old man be part of your family." Sarah couldn't speak. She could only nod. Thomas reached across the table and took her hand. "Thank you," he whispered. They sat there in silence, two broken people who had somehow found each other, and for the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. 6 months later, Sarah stood in Thomas's study, staring at the papers in front of her. "I can't accept this," she said for the third time. "Yes, you can," Thomas replied calmly from his desk. "Thomas, this is," she gestured helplessly at the documents. "This is a trust fund. For Lily. With $2 million in it. And it's too much." Thomas took off his reading glasses and set them down carefully. "Sarah, I'm going to be blunt. I'm 70 years old. My health is good, but I'm not naive. I need to know that when I'm gone, the people I love are taken care of." "You have family," Sarah protested. "You have a nephew. Victor." Thomas's expression darkened. "Who called you a gold digger to anyone who would listen. Who tried to turn the board of directors against me. Who spent the last 6 months trying to prove I've lost my mind so he can take control of the company early." Sarah winced. She'd heard about Victor's campaign. The rumors he'd spread, the accusations he'd made. Thomas had shielded her from most of it, but she knew. "Victor cares about money," Thomas continued. "Only money. He'll inherit the company. He'll get his fortune. But you and Lily, you're my family. The real kind. The kind that actually matters." He stood and walked around the desk to stand in front of her. "Please don't fight me on this. It's already done. The trust is established. Lily will have everything she needs for college, for her future, for whatever life she wants to build. Sarah's vision blurred. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to. Thomas pulled her into a hug. You already did 6 months ago when you gave a dying stranger your last meal. Sarah buried her face in his shoulder and let herself cry. That evening, Lily called Thomas Grandpa Thomas for the first time. They were reading a book together on the couch. Lily snuggled against his side, when she looked up at him and said, Grandpa Thomas, can you do the funny voice again? Thomas froze. He looked at Sarah, who was watching from the doorway with tears streaming down her face. Grandpa Thomas? He repeated softly. Lily nodded seriously. Is that okay? Mama said I could ask you. Thomas couldn't speak. He just nodded, pulling the little girl closer, and when he finally found his voice again, it was to do the funny voice she'd requested. But his hands were shaking and his eyes were wet, and Sarah could see that for the first time in decades, Thomas Pemberton felt like he belonged to something bigger than money. 1 year after that day on the sidewalk, Thomas threw a party. Not a charity gala, not a business event. A birthday party for Lily's 8th birthday. He rented out an entire arcade, invited Lily's whole class, hired a magician and a face painter, and spent the entire afternoon playing games with 8-year-olds who didn't care that he was a billionaire. They just knew he was Grandpa Thomas and he gave good hugs. Sarah watched him from across the room, this 71-year-old man in a party hat, teaching kids how to play skee-ball, and she marveled at how much life could change. He's different because of you, a voice said beside her. Sarah turned to find David Kramer, Thomas's attorney, holding a cup of punch. I'm different because of him, Sarah corrected. You're both right. David smiled. I've worked for Thomas for 20 years. I've never seen him happy. Not really happy. Not until he met you. Sarah looked back at Thomas, who was now being dogpiled by giggling children. I didn't do anything special. You saw him, David said simply. When everyone else walked past, you saw him. That's everything. That night, after the party, after the cleanup, after Lily had fallen asleep exhausted and happy, Sarah and Thomas sat on his patio again. It had become their tradition, these quiet conversations under the stars. Can I tell you something? Thomas said. Always. I lied to you. That day on the street. Sarah frowned. About what? I said I was looking for proof that kindness still existed. Thomas stared out at the dark garden. But the truth is, I was looking for a reason to keep going. Sarah's heart clenched. My wife died 5 years ago, Thomas continued, his voice soft. And I've been empty ever since. Going through the motions. Building wealth I don't need, attending meetings I don't care about, living in this enormous house all alone. I was so tired, Sarah. So tired of all of it. He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. That day on the street I was asking myself if anyone would care if I just stopped. If I disappeared. If the world would even notice. Thomas? And then you knelt down beside me, he said, his voice breaking. You gave me everything you had. You looked at me like I mattered, like my life was worth saving. And I realized, he stopped, wiping his eyes. I realized I wanted to live. For the first time in 5 years, I wanted to be alive. Sarah reached across and took his hand. You saved my life that day, Thomas whispered. Not the fake homeless person. Me. The real me. The broken, lonely old man who had forgotten what it felt like to matter to someone. You matter to me, Sarah said fiercely. You matter to Lily. We love you. Thomas smiled through his tears. I love you too. Both of you. More than I can say. They sat there holding hands, surrounded by wealth beyond measure, and understood that the most valuable thing either of them had was sitting right there. Each other. 2 years after that day on the sidewalk, Sarah opened her own restaurant. Not because Thomas pushed her to, not because he funded it entirely, though he did help with the startup costs, but because she was ready. She called it Sarah's Table, and it was everything she'd ever dreamed of. Small, cozy, affordable. The kind of place where people could get a real meal without going broke. And every day, Sarah made sure that anyone who came in hungry and couldn't pay would still eat. No questions asked. No judgment. Just food and dignity. Thomas came to the opening, standing in the back while Sarah gave a speech to the packed house. This restaurant exists because someone saw me when I was invisible, she said, her voice steady. Because someone showed me that kindness is the most powerful currency in the world. I hope that everyone who comes through these doors feels seen, feels valued, feels human. The crowd applauded. Thomas wiped his eyes. Later, a homeless man shuffled in, clearly uncomfortable, clearly expecting to be thrown out. Sarah walked up to him with a smile. Welcome to Sarah's Table. What can I get you? The man stared at her. I don't have money. Did I ask if you had money? Sarah gestured to a table. Sit down. The special today is pot roast. Sound good? The man's eyes filled with tears. He nodded, unable to speak. Sarah brought him a full meal, plus extra bread, plus a container of food to take with him. Thomas watched from across the restaurant, his heart full. The circle continued. The kindness spread. One person at a time. 3 years after that day on the sidewalk, Thomas got sick. Not immediately life-threatening but serious. Heart problems, the doctor said. He needed surgery. Sarah sat beside his hospital bed the night before the operation, holding his hand. I'm scared, Thomas admitted quietly. I know. If something happens. Nothing is going to happen, Sarah said firmly. You're going to be fine. But if it does, Thomas insisted. I need you to know something. Sarah squeezed his hand. What? These last 3 years have been the happiest of my life, he said. Watching Lily grow up. Having Sunday dinners at your apartment. Being part of something real. I've been happier in these 3 years than in all the decades before combined. Thomas? Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for letting me love you. Thank you for giving me a family when I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. Sarah couldn't see through her tears. Thank you for seeing me. For choosing us. For being the grandfather Lily deserves and the father I never had. They held each other and cried, two people bound not by blood but by something stronger. Choice. Love. Kindness. Thomas survived the surgery. He recovered slowly but steadily, and through it all Sarah and Lily were there. Reading to him, bringing him meals from the restaurant, filling his room with laughter and life. Victor came once. He stood in the doorway looking uncomfortable and said, I'm glad you're okay, Uncle Thomas. Thomas looked at him sadly. Are you? Victor opened his mouth then closed it. He left without another word. Some people never learned. But some people did. 5 years after that day on the sidewalk, on a warm spring evening, Thomas sat in the garden behind his mansion surrounded by the people he loved. Sarah was there with her new husband Marcus, the server from the diner who had finally worked up the courage to ask her out. Lily was there, now 12 years old, smart and confident and kind. David the attorney was there. Linda from the diner was there. The whole family they'd built, piece by piece, choice by choice. Thomas stood up, his glass of champagne raised. I want to make a toast, he said. Everyone quieted. 5 years ago I was the richest man in Georgia and the poorest man in spirit. I had everything money could buy and nothing that actually mattered. And then, he looked at Sarah. Then a waitress stopped on a sidewalk and saved my life. Sarah smiled, her eyes wet. She didn't save the fake homeless person, Thomas continued. She saved me. The real me. She reminded me what it means to be human. What it means to see people really see them. What it means to love without expecting anything in return. He raised his glass higher. To Sarah, who taught an old man that family isn't about blood or money. It's about showing up. It's about choosing each other every single day. It's about giving your last meal to a stranger because it's the right thing to do. To Sarah, everyone chorused, raising their glasses. Sarah stood and hugged Thomas, and he held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Because she was. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Sarah and Thomas sat on the patio one last time. You know what's funny? Sarah said. What? I used to walk past this house every day and think about how different our lives were. How you had everything and I had nothing. She smiled. And now I realize I had it backwards. Thomas tilted his head. How so? I had Lily. I had love. I had purpose. I had everything that mattered. She took his hand. You had money. It took losing everything for you to understand what you were missing. Thomas laughed. You're absolutely right. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one. Thank you, Thomas said finally. For what? For stopping. For seeing me. For letting me be part of your life. Sarah squeezed his hand. Thank you for being worth stopping for. And there, under the stars, in a garden behind a mansion that once symbolized loneliness and excess, two people sat together in perfect peace. Rich in the only way that mattered. Family. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness is never wasted. Because the smallest act of compassion can change everything. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and never underestimate the power of stopping to help a stranger. Your one choice could save a life. Maybe even your own.